Alone is, according to the Church and Drive, the greatest Christmas movie of all time. There was a write-in campaign circulating here in the building for Die Hard, but it came up short. The Home Alone is, according to the Church and Drive. This is going to date me a little bit, but I remember seeing that movie in the theater. I went with my friend Patrick Mueller-Weiss when I was in high school, and we were laughing so hard, and I just, with Home Alone, he was screaming in the seat beside me, and everybody else was too. You could barely hear what was happening in the movie because people in the theater were laughing so hard. It was a fun memory I have. Thanks for the poll, Rob. We're getting close to Christmas, actually. As mentioned, we got tonight talking about the greatest offering. Next week, we wrap up the GOAT series with the greatest event in history, talking about the greatest event of all time. And I'll let you figure out what that is. But then after that, Owen is going to be bringing the message on the 21st of November, both at Midland and here. That particular Sunday will be we'll be wrapping up the Standing in the Gap retreat, November 19th to the 21st. The Gappers will be away, though. We'll be back in time for Church and Drive here. And then the next Sunday after that, November 28th, is Advent. It's the first Sunday of Advent. It's going fast. And our Advent series is going to focus on, this little preview for you, how Jesus changed authority and used authority. We're going to look at how Jesus interacted with governmental authorities and what was it that Jesus did with the governing authorities of his day. We're going to look, the second week of Advent, we're going to talk about how Jesus related to family authority. We're talking about authority in the family. Third week, we're going to talk about religious authority. How did Jesus interact with the religious authorities, and what did he do with that? We're going to look at financial authority. How did Jesus use money? And then the Sunday right after Christmas, we're going to talk about Jesus' claim of authority. He said, all authority on heaven and on earth is mine. Now go. And so that's kind of where we're going to go for the rest of 2021. You kind of know what we're talking about, and kind of get your hearts and minds prepared for that. But for tonight, we are talking about the greatest offering of all time, at least an offering that greatly impressed Jesus. Before we get there, though, I was doing some research for this message. I was looking at the Congressional Budget Office websites. I was looking at Insider.com. I was looking at Bloomberg and some other governmental and financial websites to get some of these numbers. And does anybody have a guess at what the combined... I should tell you first, too. This sermon is a kind of a dangerous one. It's almost guaranteed to make everybody wince, including myself. So with this sermon, if you're a capitalist, if you're a socialist, if you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, whatever identifiers you put on yourself, probably something in here is going to make you not happy, including myself, because we're talking about money, we're talking about giving, and we're talking about what Jesus says about it. And the thing about Jesus, if you're in a church where all the time, whatever's being taught about what Jesus thinks and what Jesus said is just exactly what you already think, right? If all the time, if all the time you're getting told, yes, you're right, you're right, you're right, you're right, yes, you're right, you are so right, we're all just so right together, probably that's a dangerous church to be in, right? Because how did Jesus talk to his very best friend? You remember Jesus' very best friend, right? Peter. When Peter gets this idea in his head, right, his agenda, what he wanted to have happen, this is towards the end of Jesus' time with Peter in the flesh, his very best friend, he knows him well. Jesus says, get behind me. What did he say? Satan. There's not much worse you can call somebody, right? I mean, as far as insults go, as far as names that you don't want to be, right? So Jesus made his very best friends uncomfortable. Not just uncomfortable. Call them Satan, right? And so if you're at a church that never pinches you, right, be careful. And this is one of those sermons, all right? And by the way, pinch back, all right? So I happen to give most of the sermons at this church, but pinch back, because I need it too, right? Jesus spoke to Peter pretty sharply, pretty harshly, and I'm human, and I need it too. So plenty of times where I have been wrong in the past, and I'm sure plenty of times I am wrong right now and will be in the future. So I need you to hold me in check and to say, hey, Nate, pinch. Right? So we're in this together, right? And we're going to try to see what it is that Jesus has to say to us tonight. Anyway, to get back to these numbers here, anybody have a guess at the combined wealth of the billionaires in the United States? Close. Well, not actually. Multiply it by 5. $5 trillion. The combined wealth of the billionaires in the United States, $5 trillion. That's 745 people. 745 billionaires in the U.S. Combined, their wealth is $5 trillion. If you expand that number from 745 people to the top 1% of households or wealth in the United States, which is 3.3 million people, right? You get a combined wealth of $36.2 trillion. $36.2 trillion, top 1%. So we say, wow, those rich, greedy whatevers, right? But careful, this is where the pinchy part comes. Right? Don't say I didn't warn you. The middle 60% of the U.S. population, the middle 60%, right, which encompasses about 198 million people, most of us probably fall in this category. Combined wealth of $35.7 trillion. It's a lot of money. Even the bottom 50% of earners or wealth, combined wealth in the U.S. is still $3 trillion. And to put those numbers kind of in context, kind of in perspective, the U.S. GDP, the gross domestic product, the amount of money produced in the United States in the year 2020 was just under $21 trillion. Just under $21 trillion, the amount of money produced in the United States in 2020. The national debt for the U.S. is just under $27 trillion. We made almost $21 trillion. We're in debt $27 trillion. We brought in, here's the United States government in 2020 had a revenue of $3.4 trillion, but spent in 2020 $6.6 trillion. How are you going to do if you spend twice as much money as you take in? Yeah. You just keep raising the debt ceiling, right? Because don't worry. The interest that the United States paid on the debt in 2020 was a paltry $345 billion. Chump change, right? Think about all those are massive numbers, right? And when you think about trillions, that's a whole lot of zeros after whatever number you're putting in front of. And you say, well, what is a lot of money? What is a lot of money? For most of us, the answer is, well, more than whatever I got. A lot of money is more than whatever I got. But listen to this. Globally, the bottom 53% of the world's population, 53% of the world's population have a net worth below $10,000. If you have a net worth of $10,000 or more, basically if you own a car, you are in the top 47% of the world's population. You are the elite. And it is easy, right, to point the finger at some fat cat who's got more than us and say, those people should be doing their fair share. Those people should be this or that. But as we've said here before, if you're in the bottom third of the global population, if you're in this group that's living on less than, has less than $10,000 net worth, do you really care? The difference between the top 45% and the top 1%, you don't care. It's the same. The standard of living between, the difference in the standard of living between most of us in this room and on Zoom and the uber wealthy kind of pales in comparison between the difference of the standard of living between us living here in the United States at this time in history and the folks in Haiti that Standing in the Gap has gone to work with. the past, or Costa Rica, or Tijuana, Mexico. There's a way bigger difference in the standard of living, the way you live, compared to friends I met in Haiti, than between you and Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or whoever you want to say. Sobering. It's mind-blowing to stop and think about that. Here's some good news, though. While it is true that there is this crazy system that's resulted in this massive amount of money for some people, it's also true that the same system that allowed for some people to amass amazing fortunes also cut the global poverty rate drastically. Listen to this. In 1990, when I was in high school, in 1990, 36% of the planet lived in poverty. 36% of the planet in 1990 was below the global poverty line, living on less than $1.90 a day. All right. 20 years later, in 2010, that number had been cut by more than half. 16% of the population was living in poverty. 5 years after that, 10% of the world's population was living in poverty in 2015. And the most recent figures, 2021, the estimates are now it's down to 9% of the world's population living in poverty. Which is amazing. 9% of the world's population is still close to 1 billion people, right? That's a lot of people. But that number is a quarter of what it was 30 years ago. And we've got to celebrate the good things too. I mean, as well as if you want to bash on the uber wealthy, also recognize that, yes, some people have incredible fortunes, but also 3/4 of the poor who were below the poverty line 30 years ago are now out of the poverty line. And that's something to be excited about. That's impressive. That's impressive. Now, what does all that have to do with the greatest offering of all time? Well, Jesus is in the courtyard, and that scripture that Steve read for us. Jesus is in the temple courtyard, and he's watching people put money into the offering of the temple treasury, which seems a little uncouth, right? If we don't pass the plate, we haven't in a while anymore because we change things, and we'll probably get back to passing the plate. But it'd be a little uncouth if every time the plate's going around, somebody's like watching. What are you putting in? What are you putting in? Right? But we don't do that. Don't do that, right? But in this time, what Jesus is doing, there apparently in the temple, there were these trumpet-shaped vessels that I read about. These kind of like, sort of like funnels, right? And they're made of metal. And what people would do is they'd come in these, there's no checks, there's no credit cards, right? Currency it's coins, right? You've got gold, you've got silver, you've got copper coins. And people would put their money into these trumpet-shaped funnel things that would be collected. Well, you got these metal coins going into these metal cones. That makes a lot of noise, right? And so if you're a wealthy person and you're putting in a lot of money, that makes a lot of noise. Rattle, 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 bang, 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 bang. It's kind of announcing it with trumpets. You're putting in, and everybody who's in the court can hear this. And like, whoa. This is like, if you've been through a casino or walked through a casino and somebody hits the jackpot and it just dings out all the coins. It makes a lot of noise when the quarters come into the trays. I've heard. Right? All right, so there is this attention that's being drawn to what's happening. And when people put a boatload of coins in, that's impressive. And so people are seeing this. Jesus is noticing this, and his disciples are noticing this. And then also there's this little widow who, as we've mentioned before, the widows and the orphans in Jesus' day, these are the most vulnerable people in society, right? These are the most at-risk people. These are people who there's no social safety net, they've got their family, or they can beg, or they can do whatever. They don't have a whole lot of options. And this little widow comes in, and she's got these 2 small copper coins. And when she puts in these 2 copper coins, they don't make a lot of noise. Chunk, clink. That's it, right? No, lots of rattling. Doesn't go on for minutes. It's less than a second. Those are fun little things. Yeah, maybe. But it doesn't make a big impact. It doesn't make a noise. It doesn't draw attention, except it catches Jesus' attention. And Jesus draws his disciples' attention. And just after this, we see the last verse Steve read for us. The disciples are telling Jesus, look at this structure. Look at this edifice. Jesus, do you see how beautiful this temple is? And the temple was impressive. Herod the Great, he wasn't called great because he was a nice guy. He was called great because he built a lot of stuff. All right? And he was brutal, but he got stuff done. And he had refurbished and revamped and expanded and remodeled the temple, and it was something to see. And Jesus' disciples are looking around at the beauty and the splendor of the temple. It was meant to be imposing. It was meant to be a copy, a glimpse, a foreshadowing of the heavenly throne room. It was meant to make people be in awe of the enormity of the structure and the majesty of the one to who the temple was dedicated. Right? And the disciples they're really impressed with the big sums of money that the wealthy people are putting in. And they're really impressed with the grandeur of the temple building. Jesus says, that little widow, with her 2 coins, put in more. Her offering was greater than all the others. Because they're never going to miss that money. They're never going to miss it, those wealthy folks. And, there's thank God for generous, wealthy people. Right? Thank God for generous, wealthy people. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or Warren Buffett or whatever, these people have done, they're doing tons of stuff to eradicate AIDS and end global, feed hungry people all over the world, and lots of great stuff. When I was at seminary, every once in a while there'd be a massive gift that would come in, $1 million or something, or if maybe you read about in your college, some wealthy alumni gives a lot of money to them, or other really charitable causes. Super cool when we say, yeah, let's them build a new building or start a new ministry or new outreach. Great, awesome, fantastic. Thank God for those big gifts. Jesus doesn't say it's bad that those wealthy people gave. What he said is that widow gave more because they gave out of their abundance. They're never going to miss that. That huge check, there's the billionaires pledge that maybe you've heard about, where there's a group of billionaires, an expanding, increasing number of billionaires who have signed a pledge to give away half of their fortunes, which is cool. And the guy who's founded, the billionaire who kind of founded this, getting it going, said, no, if you have $1 billion, it's not going to hurt you to give away half of it. Kids are still going to be okay. You got $500 million instead of $1 billion. What can you do with $1 billion you can't do with $500 million? Not much, right? So that's great. Real good. But they're never going to miss those huge gifts. Or this widow, she gave out of love. She gave out of worship. She gave sacrificially all that she had to live on. Those 2 copper coins to that widow were, had a bigger impact, maybe. It was a bigger percentage of her annual budget, right, than these massive gifts from these other folks. And she could have said, you know what? Look at this temple. It is gigantic and it is huge. My 2 little bits here, they're not going to pay somebody to dust 1 centimeter of this thing. It's nothing. And look at all these people pouring money into the vessels. The temple doesn't need my money. This is nothing compared to, this is a drop in the bucket. It won't make any difference to the bottom line budget of the temple treasury if I put this in or not. It's less than a rounding error. It's so many decimal places out that it doesn't matter. It is financially insignificant. And she could have thought all those things. She could have said, I need this money more than the temple does, because guess what? The temple didn't need the money. Look at all the big stones. But that wasn't what she said. She said, my generosity, my giving, my offering is not going to be determined by what other people do or do not do. My generosity, my faithfulness to God, my obligation to worship my Creator and to participate in whatever way I can in the worship and in the service in God's name is not going to be limited or defined by what other people do or don't do. I have an obligation to God. I love God. And because I love God, I am going to do what I can do. I'm going to do what I am called to do. I'm not going to excuse myself because other people can do more. I'm not going to excuse myself because I need this more. I am going to give because I love. I am going to give because I am loved. I am going to give because this is what I can do because of the way I have been blessed. Too many people in the church and out of the church obsessed about other people. They got more money. They shouldn't have this. They should have, and want, they're not going to do their part until the system changes or whatever. But you know what? Jesus didn't condemn the system. He didn't condemn the economic system that resulted in a widow having 2 mites and this other people having massive amounts. He didn't talk about it at all. He said, this woman has given more. What he said. This woman's given more than all the others. They gave out of their abundance. She gave out of her poverty, all that she had to live on. And I got to believe that she was okay. I got to believe that just like Laura Lee's story of her friend, when you cast yourself totally on God and you open yourself up to faithfulness to God, I think she's all right. Jesus noticed her. Jesus called his disciples' attention to her. And Jesus praised her amongst all these other wealthy people. And as far as that massive building that the disciples were so impressed by, along with those other giant sums of money, Jesus says, don't worry about the temple. Don't be impressed with the temple. Guess what? Not one stone is going to be left on another. As impressive as this building is, the money that the widow's giving, it's not going to support the building. The building's temporary. The building's going to be gone. Just a couple of decades after Jesus, maybe 4 decades after Jesus spoke these words, the temple was gone. Right? So the money that we're entrusted with, some of us have a lot of money, and some of us maybe don't have a lot of money, although relatively speaking, as we've said, globally, compared to all the humans that have ever lived on the planet, even the college kids don't feel like you have a ton, you're doing okay. Listen to what Leo the Great said. Leo the Great lived 1,1600 years ago, and in his reflection on this passage, he said, although the spite of some people does not grow gentle with any kindness, nevertheless, the works of mercy are not fruitless, and kindness never loses what is offered to the ungrateful. May no one, dearly beloved, make themselves strangers to good works. Let no one claim that his poverty scarcely sufficed for himself and could not help another. Whatever is offered from a little is great. And in the scale of divine justice, the quantity of the gift is not measured, but the steadfastness of the souls. The widow in the gospel put 2 coins into the treasury, and this surpassed the gifts of all the rich. No mercy is worthless before God. No compassion is fruitless. He has given different resources to human beings, but he does not ask different affections. That's a powerful quote. He's given different resources to different human beings, but he does not ask different affections. We all are called to be compassionate. We are all called to be generous. And generosity, I heard this quote this week too, generosity requires courage. It takes courage to be generous. If I give something to you, I won't have it anymore. It can be tempting to hoard. It can be tempting to pinch. But we're called to be generous. We're called to let our emotions be stirred, to move to compassion. And this offering that the widow gives, Jesus says this is the greatest. This is more than all those others. And it can be, as I said, easy to focus on those who have more than us and think they need to do more. But what about all those who look at us the same way? In your table groups or in your Zoom groups, I invite you to think about, of course, as always, anything that this message or these thoughts stirred up in you. But just to kind of prompt your thinking, who do you know that lives really generously? Who do you know in your life that is a super generous person? Are they a billionaire? Maybe, but probably not. Another question you can think of, what is God calling you to do differently with your money? Should other people follow your example in how you use money? Are you a good example of generous, faithful living, of sound financial decisions, faithful decisions, or not? Should other people follow your advice and your patterns of how you offer, how you use what it is that God has entrusted you with? Let's pray together. Jesus, we thank you for the blessings that you have showered out upon us. We thank you for giving us everything. And yes, you've called us to use what you've entrusted us with for the benefit of others. We glorify you when we are generous to other people. And God, whatever inequalities and unrighteous things happen in the world around us, God, those things are there, and you've said that they're always going to be there. We're called as your people to bring your peace and your shalom to bear in this world through our actions, God, through what we do. Whatever Caesar does, God, whatever powers and principalities do, help us, your people, to be faithful to what it is you've called us to do. And with enough widow's mites, God, you have been changing the world for over 2,000 years. Help us, God, not worry so much about what other people do or don't do. Help us be faithful to what you're calling us to do. Pray this all in your name, Jesus, and for the sake of your kingdom. Amen.